And my name is Stephanie Robison. I am a coordinator in our Data Excellence Department, and I'll be your presenter today. So here's today's agenda. We'll begin by going over the purpose of today's webinar, then go through the NSLDS requirements for correcting SSCR errors, and then we'll go into the meat of the presentation, which is going over the different errors and how to resolve them. And we'll end with some best practices, available Clearinghouse resources regarding the SSCR errors, and then we'll have time for a Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions at any point throughout the presentation, you can post those in the Q&A pod beneath the presentation screen, and then we'll collect those to answer at the end of the presentation. So first we'll go over the purpose of today's webinar. And the purpose is to go over the NSLDS requirements for the errors returned from SSCR roster reporting and what may occur if your school does not correct the errors. We will also provide more in-depth guidance on commonly seen errors that have not been covered in previous webinars, including errors related to address information. And lastly, we'll offer information on how to prepare for and help prevent errors moving forward. So we'll begin by going over the NSLDS requirements for the SSCR errors that are returned during the SSCR reporting to NSLDS. NSLDS has strict guidelines on when certain processes and reporting must take place. The one we are focusing on today is that SSCR errors must be corrected within 10 days of receiving the error report. Once the Clearinghouse receives the SSCR error report after the initial reporting to NSLDS, those errors are posted on our secure website for your school to view and correct. The Clearinghouse due date for those errors is 8 days to allow us time to process all the updates into our system and send the data to NSLDS successfully within the 10-day compliance window. Previously, NSLDS and guidance and regulations required only that a response was sent within 10 days if an error report was generated after SSCR reporting. In late 2016, we began seeing a shift in both NSLDS and auditor expectation and how these errors should be approached. Guidance is now calling for the SSCR errors to be corrected within 10 days. However, please note that the actual regulation has not changed. So what does this mean for schools? It means that now NSLDS is calling for schools to correct the errors on the SSCR error report within 10 days. To meet the new guidance from NSLDS, the Clearinghouse created a new online tool that allows schools to view and correct their SSCR errors on our secure website if any errors were returned. That new service went live at the end of December in 2016, with most schools seeing their first correctable SSCR error report in January of 2017. So the big question with this shift in expectations from NSLDS and auditors is what happens if you don't correct your SSCR errors. First, any students who have SSCR errors returned are getting rejected by NSLDS. That means that their enrollment is not getting loaded into the NSLDS system, and it is not available for the servicers of federal loans to see. Not being able to verify the student's enrollment could result in the loss of student loan subsidies and can also cause students to be taken out of deferment and put into repayment while they are still in school. Not correcting SSCR errors can also result in a negative impact to your school's NSLDS statistics score. The NSLDS requirement is that the percent of students with certified program enrollment must be at least 90%. For more information on the NSLDS statistics score and how the SSCR errors impact it, please check out the Meet and Beat the 90% Threshold webinar that is on our Clearinghouse Academy site. A link to that webinar is in the web links pod on your screen. And lastly, failure to correct SSCR errors can result in audit findings. So now we'll briefly review what happens when your school reports to the Clearinghouse and when the Clearinghouse reports to NSLDS. Schools send files to the Clearinghouse, and after the Clearinghouse performs checks and schools correct any errors, those files are uploaded into our database. On a monthly basis, the Clearinghouse receives your school's SSCR roster from NSLDS. This roster contains students whom NSLDS shows are associated with your school. The Clearinghouse responds to this roster with the most recent data that you sent to us. 4 days later, the Clearinghouse runs a supplemental SSCR ads process. If your school has submitted anything to the Clearinghouse between the 1st and the 11th of the month, a mid-month roster may be run to capture that data. When the Clearinghouse receives the NSLDS SSCR error report for your school, they will be posted on our secure site and a notification will be sent to you via email. You can log on to the secure site to view your SSCR error report and, if necessary, correct any errors online. These errors must be corrected within 10 days of receipt according to NSLDS guidelines. Here's the list of errors that we will be covering today. They are errors 11, 21, 26, 33, 35, 41, 42, 45, 51, and 52. And I know this seems like quite a big list of errors, but most of these have very simple resolutions, so they won't take too long to cover. So now we will go over each of these errors in detail and how to resolve them. Our first error is error 11, and this error occurs when the student's social security number, first name, or date of birth does not match between the Clearinghouse and NSLDS databases. This error typically occurs on the error report from the supplemental ads file. To resolve this error, you will want to begin by confirming that the student's information is correct in the Clearinghouse system. You want to compare the student's first name, date of birth, and social security number against your system to make sure that there are no errors. If there is any information that needs to be updated, you can do an online update to correct the student's record through the Student Lookup tab on our website. If after reviewing the data you find that the student's record in our system is correct, you will need to query the student's record in NSLDS to compare the records and find the discrepancy. You'll want to specifically look out for name changes and shortened legal names. Unfortunately, the Clearinghouse only receives back from NSLDS what we send to them, so we're not able to identify where the records don't match. Our next error is error 21, which is for an invalid enrollment status effective date. Clearinghouse validations during data intake prevent this error from occurring in most cases. However, if this error is flagged for a student, it is typically due to NSLDS having an incorrect date of birth for the student or a date of birth that is less than 12 years old when compared to the status start date. This screen will show you an example of an error 21. So you can see in the red box that the date of birth for this student, as shown on the error report, is 9/19/2008. And please note that this is the date of birth that NSLDS has for the student on the roster. It is not necessarily the date of birth that is in the Clearinghouse's system. And the second red box is the status start date for the student's graduated status, which is 8/1/2012. When we compared this date to the 9/19/2008 date of birth, they are less than 12 years apart and would indicate that the student was 4 years old when attending. So to resolve the error 21, you'll first want to confirm that the student's date of birth is correct in the Clearinghouse system. If the date of birth is not correct, update the student's date of birth through the Student Lookup tab on the Clearinghouse website. If the student's date of birth is correct on the Clearinghouse website, this typically means that NSLDS has an incorrect date of birth and the error will need to be resolved directly with them. If you have the ability to query the student on NSLDS and find that the date of birth is correct, use the push to roster function to add the student with the correct date of birth to the roster. That record should then overwrite the record with the incorrect date of birth on the roster, which should resolve the error. Next up is error 26, which comes up because the anticipated graduation date is before the certification date when the student is reported in an enrolled status. To resolve this error, the anticipated graduation date will need to be updated to a future date if the student is still enrolled. If the student is no longer enrolled, update the student's record with a withdrawn, graduated, or deceased status and the effective date for that status. Similar to error 26, error 33 is also caused by the anticipated graduation date. Error 33 occurs due to the anticipated graduation date being in the past before the enrollment status effective date. To resolve the error, update the anticipated graduation date to a future date that is greater than the status effective date. And this error must be corrected through the Student Lookup tab on our website, as it is not yet correctable through the SSCR error platform. Our next error is error 35, which occurs when a student has been on a leave of absence for more than 180 days. Your school's policy may allow a leave of absence to extend for more than 180 days. However, per the FSA handbook, a leave of absence cannot exceed a total of 180 days in any 12-month period. When the leave of absence extends past the 180-day mark is when you will begin to see the error 35s appear. There are two paths to resolve the error 35. If the student has not returned from a leave of absence after 180 days, NSLDS guidance states that the student should be withdrawn with an effective date equal to when the leave began. However, if a leave of absence status and a withdrawn status have the same effective date, an error 32 may generate on future SSCR error reports. Due to this, we recommend updating the effective date for the withdrawn status to one day before or one day after the leave began. If the student has returned from their leave of absence and is enrolled for the current term, you'll need to update the student's record to reflect their current enrollment status and effective date. To make these updates for the error 35, first click on the student's hyperlinked SSN. And that will take you to the student's record, where you'll need to update the status, and status effective date as needed. Once you are done, click the green Submit button at the bottom of the screen, and the record will be submitted to the Clearinghouse for processing. So the next couple errors that we're going to go over are all related to addresses. The first one that we will cover is error 41. This error comes up when there are spaces before the address in line 1 of the address. To resolve the error, you'll want to update the street address 1, city, and state fields to UK for unknown. Next is error 42. This error occurs when where an invalid state code is included in the address. To resolve the error, update the state code to a valid code or FO if the student has an international address. You can find a list of valid state codes in the Clearinghouse's Programming and Testing Guide, which I have provided in a link below the presentation. Our last address error is error 45, which is the most common address error. This error is typically caused by an incorrect state or country code in the address. I most often see this error for international addresses where the country code was incorrectly placed into the state field. Like with the error 42, you'll need to update the state and country field as needed to correct the codes. And valid state and country codes can be found in the Clearinghouse's Programming and Testing Guide, which, again, I've linked in the web links pod below the presentation. So now we'll go over a few tips on how to help prevent address-related SSCR errors before we cover our last two errors. First, be sure to provide complete address information for all students on your enrollment file. A complete address needs the street address 1, city, state, and country fields populated. If the student did not provide an address or provided an incomplete address, fill those missing fields in with UK for unknown. NSLDS recognizes UK as a valid way to populate address fields when the address is not known. Next, if you have any address warnings posted to your school from your enrollment file, be sure to review and correct these warnings. These are not required to fix like errors on your file. However, not fixing them can result in SSCR errors that you will have to later correct. For any updates that are made to the address information on your error resolution report, also update your SIS to reflect the updated information so the address warning does not occur again. Next up is error 51, which occurs when the OPE ID that appears in the Move To field on the student's record is not for a valid branch. This is most often seen in combination with error 52 for students who were reported under a dummy branch, such as branch 80 or 81. Since those branches are only used on the Clearinghouse side, NSLDS does not recognize them as valid locations. To resolve the error, update the student's record to either null the Move To field completely or update the branch to the 00 OPE ID. You will also want to update your school's file extract so this field is either left blank or reflects the branch 00 OPE ID. The Move To field is used by NSLDS to move a student from one branch to another and really only needs to be populated when you're trying to move a student from one branch's roster to another. Our last error for the day is error 52, and there are two main reasons why this error occurs. The first is in combination with error 51, which we covered on the previous slide. The second is when a student has the Move To field populated and appears on the roster for the incorrect branch. And we will be focusing on this reason for the next slide. The error 52 occurs when the Move To field is populated, the student appears on the roster for the incorrect branch, and the two branches do not share an enrollment administrator with NSLDS. An example of this would be a student at the 01 medical branch appearing on the roster for the 05 law branch. Obviously, these two branch codes don't share reporting, so they would not have the same enrollment administrator with NSLDS. There are two steps you can take to help resolve the error and to prevent it in the future. First, when extracting your enrollment file to send to the Clearinghouse, null the Move To fields. As I mentioned on the slides regarding Error 51, this field only needs to be populated when you are truly trying to move the student from one branch to another. To resolve current errors, you can null the Move To field on the student's record through the Student Lookup tab. The second big step that is really important for making sure these don't continue to appear is to contact NSLDS directly and work with them to ensure that the impacted students are appearing on the correct roster in the future. This error is really only appearing because the student is on the wrong roster. So the students appearing on the incorrect roster is really the bigger issue at play with this error and needs to be resolved. Not only to help prevent this error in the future, but also to make sure the students' enrollment records are appearing correctly in the NSLDS database. So now we'll go over some best practices that apply to all the SSCR errors. First is to don't panic. I know that the SSCR errors cause a lot of stress and frustration for a lot of people, but we'll get through it together, and we're always here to support you if you have any questions or have any problems with your errors. Next is to stay diligent. Stay on top of your errors. Even if you have a large amount that you find you cannot resolve in the 10-day time frame, keep working on them. Any error, for the most part, if you don't fix it, it will show up on the next error report. And keep records for your auditors. You can print confirmation pages, and if you're familiar with the SSCR error correction platform, to the right of everything on there, there are columns that show you the user ID and time and date stamp when corrections were made. So you can refer to that if any of the SSCR errors come up in audits. And work smarter. If you find that you have hundreds of SSCR errors, try sending in a formatted file instead of doing hundreds of manual corrections. If you're updating NSLDS directly for any reason, don't forget to make the same updates with the Clearinghouse, at least 24 hours after updating NSLDS. Doing an update less than 24 hours after updating NSLDS can cause error 32s on your next error report due to NSLDS having a newer certification date. When adding records to the Clearinghouse's system, make sure to include a valid SSN on the record. Only records with valid SSNs can be sent to NSLDS. And each list of errors is static, so it will not change or update as you are making corrections to them. And lastly, bookmark or save the Clearinghouse resources for SSCR error correction, and most of those resources are linked below the presentation in the web links pod. And except for the email address, all of the resources on this page are linked in the web links pod below the presentation. So the first is the Compliance Central page, which is pretty much your one-stop shop for anything to do with compliance and also preparing for and responding to audits. Next is the FAQ list for SSCR errors. Next is the list of SSCR error code definitions, which gives short definitions and resolutions for all the SSCR errors that you can encounter. And then last is the Clearinghouse Academy online page, which has a schedule of upcoming webinars and other events, and also has on-demand tutorials and recorded versions of the webinars if you need to revisit them.